everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Sean's Movie Crusades. My name is Sean Waskrug, and I'm here to review all the latest films in theaters and streaming, as well as any of you recommend, whether they be recent films or old school movies. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe button to the channel so that way you guys stay up to date with all the latest videos, and also don't forget to follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. Now today we're going to be reviewing the latest sequel from Blumhouse, Happy Death Day to You. Now, up until about a week ago, I hadn't even seen the first film. Mainly because I remember when the trailers for Happy Death Day came out, and they looked awful to me. The trailer was cringeworthy. The main actress came off incredibly annoying, and I just had zero interest in seeing this film. But I constantly kept hearing positive things about the movie overall. That it was actually very unique and funny. Not really unique, but unique on the take of what it's actually doing. And an overall enjoyable film. So I knew eventually at some point I would have to check it out. But with the sequel coming out, it kind of pushed me a little bit further to get into the film. And so I watched it about 2 days ago. And I was considering doing a review for that. But I figure I'm probably going to talk about it during this movie, or during this review. So, spoiler warning, if you have not seen the first film, which is Happy Death Day, don't watch this review. Not that I don't mind the clicks and the likes, but because the certain elements that I have to talk about for this movie strongly go through the events that happened in the first film. Number two, if you haven't seen Happy Death Day, don't see this movie. Now, sometimes people can go into a sequel or sequels and not seen the previous films and totally be okay with it. This is not that case. This movie is a complete connection to the first film, and without seeing that first film, you will be lost. You might still enjoy the film overall to a point, but there are certain elements of the film you are not going to get the jokes for. There are certain elements of the film that you're not going to fully understand because you had not seen the first film. So if you have not seen Happy Death Day, I strongly encourage you not to go see Happy Death Day to You. But on a side note, if you guys have not seen Happy Death Day, I strongly recommend it. Because I really enjoyed the film. When I watched it a couple days ago, I was just kind of like, here we go. And I generally enjoyed that movie from beginning to end. And it kind of made me mad that I waited so long to see it. So, going into, for people who know of Happy Death Day, it's basically a horror comedy, or at least the first film was a horror comedy with elements of Groundhog Day or Edge of Tomorrow, where we have the main character, Tree, and she basically, she's a horrible person in a sense, or at least we're portrayed to see her as a horrible person. And at the end of her birthday, like at the end of the night of her birthday, she gets killed by a guy in a babyface mask. And then she literally wakes right back up, reliving the same day over and over and over again, keep getting killed by the same babyface killer, until she A, either survives the night, and B, figures out who the killer is, so that way she can stop him. And that's the general, plot of the first film, and it worked great. I mean, it had some horror elements, but it was mostly for comedy. But the main reason why it worked was the fantastic performance of Jessica Roth. She was amazing in the movie. She played a bitch real well, but then she also played a generally good human being in the film, and she had great moments of emotions in the film, because the general plot through her character of why she had turned into the horrible person she was because her mother died 3 years prior, and she was incredibly close to her, and at that point, then college took over, and she just, in a sorority, and it's all from there, and then the love of her mom just took a huge toll on her and her father, and they had a fantastic, beautiful scene at the end of the first film that was actually really emotional to a point, and Jessica Roth's a fantastic actress. So the second film, Happy Death Day to You, starts with, instead of it being about Tree, the best friend of Tree's new boyfriend, Carter, played by Israel Broussard. This guy, Ryan, who's played by Fiyu. he starts to run through the same ordeal as well, where he wakes up literally the day of, or the next day of where Happy Death Day ended. Where Happy Death Day was the Monday the 18th. This is Tuesday the 19th. He wakes up really going through the same motions that we saw at the end of the first film, and then he gets killed, and he wakes up again, and then he starts going through the same ordeal. Because of that, it reverts all the way through and hits back to Tree. And Tree, even though she got out of the ordeal in the first film, gets brought back in to the time loop and now has to fix it again while still constantly trying to avoid being killed by the babyface killer. That's the general plot without going too far into it, because the best thing about this movie is to go in as cold as possible by not knowing all the extra elements of the film or the twists and turns that this movie's going to take. So there is a lot more to the plot than just what I just told you, but that's probably the most I can give you without going spoiler with it. Now, what works with Happy Death Day to you? First off, like I just previously said, Jessica Roth is fantastic. I really, really want to see her in something outside of Happy Death Day, because, I mean, she did do a small thing in La La Land, but she was not even a character that you even remember or recognize. She plays one of Emma Stone's roommates. I want to see her in a film outside of this, whether it be a dramatic role, comedic role, or what have you. I want to see her out of this element, because she, as much as I enjoy these films, she's too good for these movies. I mean, her performances are way too good for these two films. And so I would really love to see her in something else, to see if she can really bring that same ability to other films, because she is the heart and soul of this movie. She's where all the best comedy comes from, and through Tree, the movie doesn't work without Tree. You take that character out of it, and that was my main worry going into this, is because I knew in the trailers that we were going to be, it looked as we were going to be going into the Ryan character, who we really didn't know a whole lot of. And while he is enjoyable in small parts, I was generally worried, because I was like, I don't know if he's going to carry the same weight as Tree. But then the story literally turns into Tree's story again, as it literally reverts right back to Happy Death Day 1. So while that might be a step back to some people, I consider it a positive, because her performance is still top-notch, and it's the real reason like these movies work. And so to have it revert back to her taking over the reins as the lead character, even though the beginning of the movie starts with Ryan, is a huge bonus in my eyes, and I'm hopefully to a lot of people, because her performance, like I said, top-notch. But she really shows levels from where in the first one, where she was just a bitch, to a victim, to growing to be a good person, and to this one, continuing that, she actually becomes a heroine in this one, and kind of just takes control of her own destiny and everyone else's around her. And you've seen her character grow from the beginning of the first film to the end of this one, and it's a great character arc for her overall. And Jessica Roth, like I said, does a fantastic job. The whole rest of the cast, for the most part, from the first film, also do a great job. You still have Danielle, played by Rachel Matthews. She's still a great supporting character. I enjoy her whenever she's on screen. She's a highlight in the first film, and she's definitely a highlight in this one. Israel Broussard, like I said, who plays Carter, he's good in his role. He is kind of stationary in this movie. He's just kind of there to react, which he did in the first film, but I feel like he just had more to go off of in the first film than he did in this one. Fiyu is good in his role. Sometimes he does go a little over the top, but he gets reeled in real quickly. He does a good job there. That's basically the main original cast. And then also, forgot about Lori, who was the killer, like I said, spoiler, who was the actual killer in the first film. She's back, because like I said, everything repeats back around to the initial day that we saw in Happy Death Day. So her character actually comes back into this, and it's a different performance as we saw in the first film, and she gives a lot more to the character as well. So everyone kind of brings something new to the table in this one, and they all do a good job overall. I can't necessarily say that about any of the new characters we get in the movie, outside of one that I can't mention because of spoilers. But the two new college characters that we are introduced to, one's just kind of passable and okay, and the other one I think just doesn't work real well. I mean, this character, he's actually played by Shirai Sharma. He plays Samir. He's one of Ryan's science colleagues or classmates. It's just some of the jokes don't land with him, and he just plays very generic in terms of his character. It's just like we've seen this character before. So his jokes just didn't really connect with me like it did for most people. So technically that's a negative on what doesn't work that I don't have to mention now. But yeah, other than that, the rest of the cast, solid, just like they were in the first film overall. Then this is why I stress the fact that don't see this movie unless you have seen the first film. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of Easter eggs in this film that answer questions that were not answered in the first film, that helps actually make things make sense that you saw in the first film. You're like, well, they never explained that, so that makes no sense. That actually you're like, oh, that's why this happened, or that's why this thing was there. That get explained in this movie, and then there are even more Easter eggs that are dropped in this movie that are going to potentially lead to future installments of this franchise. There's a ton of things in this movie to watch out for and pay attention to that maybe you might not notice in the first film that get answered for you in the second film, or even things you didn't notice in this movie that will get answered in previous or in future installments. But there are a ton of Easter eggs for you to watch out for and pay attention to, so keep your eyes open as you're watching the movie, because there are things that are going to get dropped on you that are either going to clear things up or leave you with more questions. There's also, just like in the first film, there are a ton of emotional beats in this movie. Mainly with Tree. There's a certain thing that happens to her character in this movie that is a very vital character arc for her in this film. And Jessica Roth, like I said before, knocks it out of the park to the point where there were actually people in the theater watching this with me that cried during this movie. And I'll admit, I did not cry, but I definitely felt emotional watching those scenes because Jessica Roth does a fantastic performance, and the Tree character we've actually grown to love as a character over these two movies. Watching these scenes, she does a great job of bringing us in and fully believing the character's arc that we are getting through these emotional beats. So there are actually a good chunk of emotional beats in the film overall for the Tree character. Also, it expands on the Happy Death Day universe. In the first film, we have no idea why the time loop happens or what is the reasoning for it. In this movie, that does get answered to a point. While the science doesn't necessarily work, per se, at certain points, it does get explained why those things happened to her in the first film and why they're happening this time around. So it definitely expands the entire universe into something exciting and, like I said previously, something to look forward to with future installments. Now, I keep mentioning the future installments because there is a post-credit scene. It is right after the initial graphics of the credits, so it's not at the very, very end. So literally after this mid-credit scene, you can go home because there is no end credit scene. But this mid-credit scene either is extending this into future films and broadening the universe of Happy Death Day to a larger extent, or B, it's a last-second jab joke and they're not going to make any more movies. Either way, I'm totally okay with it. I enjoyed this movie overall, even though it's not a perfect film by any means, and I think overall I do enjoy the first film more. If they make more, I'll be happy because I love this core group of characters from these actors and actresses doing a great job, and I would love to see more from them. But on the second hand, I also don't want the actual story of this group of characters to get overblown and become tired and redundant to the point where we end up growing up hating these movies. So if that ended up just being a last-second joke, totally okay with it. It was actually a pretty funny gag. If it opens up to future films, I'm okay with that, but don't go too far, excuse me, to the point where this becomes too big for the story that you're initially telling. Now, what does not work, I mentioned a couple things earlier, as certain comedic performances don't work properly, and some of the science backing the overall time loop stuff doesn't necessarily 100% follow properly. The main problem that a lot of people are going to have, now I don't personally have a problem with this, but I can see a lot of people having a problem with this, is the main problem a lot of people probably had with the first film, is that the first film was directed straight up as a slasher horror film, but as the movie went on, it came off more as a comedy, because there's just more and more funny ways for the tree character to die. This one is 100% not a horror movie. There's maybe a couple horror elements here or there in the film, but this movie is a straight-up sci-fi comedy, because it's all about the time travel and the time loops and stuff like that, to the point where the babyface killer kind of seems more like just an add-on to the film, because he's the killer, unlike the first film, is not the focal point of this movie. The focal point is the time loop and getting Tree and everybody out of this loop so that way they can go on with their lives. Almost to the point where there are times where they forget about the babyface killer altogether, and they kind of have to reel the story back in and go, oh yeah, we have this killer on the loose, we should probably figure out who it is. And because of that, that's why the movie doesn't feel like a horror at all, because they literally take the slasher out of the film for most of it, and then at the very end they go, oh yeah, oh wait, yeah, we gotta figure out who the killer is. And so yeah, it's definitely, it's not a horror movie. I was totally okay with that because I felt that it expands the story better, that they didn't feel like they had to make it a horror film anymore, that they could broaden this story out to it's kind of like a mixture of a sci-fi rom-com combined together. And I think it works beautifully in that sense. It doesn't have to be a horror. The horror elements are there to a point, but it like I said, it literally gets taken out of the film for half to 3/4 of it. The babyface killer is not a focal point in this movie. He's there, and he'll pop up here and there, but like I said, he's not the important part. But because he is not an important part, the new babyface killer in this is also just kind of a blah, and then they add an extra twist onto it at the end of it to kind of make it a little more like, oh shit. And it ended up just kind of, it didn't feel like an oh shit moment. It kind of just felt more like an tacked on extra joke, and it just didn't work overall, because I feel like they were just trying to be clever, and it just wasn't needed, because the story didn't necessarily need the babyface killer in this, especially since they found a way to work around the babyface killer in the movie. So them having to find out who the killer is, and then once we get the killer reveal, it's just kind of like, okay, let's move on from this, because I really don't care about this part. I want to get back to the actual initial story. Also, there's like I said previously, and people who know the first film are going to know in this, there are a ton of time loops and redos in the film. So for people who aren't paying attention fully, these are the people who are on their phones while watching the movie, which I can't stand people who do that. Or the people who are just kind of half watching this, whether they're watching it at home or in theaters. You might get lost at certain points. So this is definitely something that you're going to want to give it its full attention, so that way you guys are staying on point with the story as it goes on. And yeah, I mean, that's something, because there are certain parts where it's going to revert back to a situation, or it's going to mention something, and if you're not paying attention, you're just not going to remember it, or you're going to go, wait, what happened? And which happened to certain people in the theaters. There were certain people who were confused. Why? Because they were on their phone for most of the movie. And so naturally, they could get frustrated, and they might not like the movie overall. I personally don't stay on. I put my phone on mute, and I focus on the movie that I'm watching, so it was not a problem for me, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Overall, and then also one last thing. For people who aren't interested in the Tree story anymore, and they were excited that this story was going to go toward the Ryan character, and then they find out that it's actually still about Tree, that might be a negative. I personally loved it, like I said earlier, but it does feel like they just reverted back to the original film being redone over again, instead of it being an actual sequel, which it is. But it's basically kind of like Evil Dead. Evil Dead 1 was a straight-up horror, and then Evil Dead 2 was literally a retelling or a redo of Evil Dead, but done as a comedy. This is kind of like what that is, too, where Happy Death Day was a horror comedy, and then Happy Death Day 2U is kind of a sci-fi comedy redoing the first film, which I think works great. Like I said, not as strong as the first film, but still a solid film overall. And I guess that goes with my overall thoughts of the movie. if you enjoyed Happy Death Day, you're going to enjoy the hell out of Happy Death Day 2. You might not like it as much as the first film, but you will still enjoy it for the most part. If you didn't like Happy Death Day, I don't see you liking Happy Death Day 2 any more or any less than what you liked of the first film. But like I said, I love the cast. Jessica Rothe is a fantastic actress. I love the way the story developed and expanded the universe that we saw. And I cannot wait to see if they do more. And if they do, great. And if they don't, I'm totally cool with how they left it. Like I said, if you're a fan of the first film, or if you haven't seen it and you're wondering if you should see it, I strongly recommend seeing both these movies and seeing them as close together as you can. If you have seen Happy Death Day and you saw it when it first came out, back in 2017, and you're thinking of going to see Happy Death Day 2, I strongly encourage watching Happy Death Day again right before you see this, because it literally is like two movies just full on connected. Where some sequels are like, oh, years or months later, this is literally right where the first one ends. It goes right into this one. So I strongly suggest that if you guys have not seen Happy Death Day in a while, go back and watch the first one before you see the second one, as it will help you pick up Easter eggs and help with the story overall. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. And if you guys did, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys feel like this review is worth sharing, go ahead and hit that share button. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that way you guys stay up to date with all the latest reviews that pop up on the channel. And most importantly, don't forget to follow us on all social media outlets you see below. And until next time, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Movie Crusaders.